Next up is a pair of presentations we've entitled Walking in Your Boots. Our first speaker is Tyson Johnson. Tyson is the general manager of Sooner Cattle Company, a large stocker cattle and cow-calf operation headquartered near Pawhuska, Oklahoma. Tyson is an Arizona native with experience managing large ranches in Arizona, Florida, and Texas, all of which have had both cattle and wildlife components. During his time with Deseret Ranches, he's been a part of progressive management teams focused on sustainable and balanced resource use. We here at the Institute are proud to claim Tyson as one of our graduates. In the first of these paired presentations, we've asked him to discuss wildlife in the context of a cattle operation. Tyson?
Good afternoon, everybody. It's an honor to be with you. It's, even though it may be more of a virtual with you, but I wish we were all there in South Texas in Kingsville and could shake everybody's hand and visit. But it's regardless, the Institute has put together some great events in the past, and it's an honor to be a part of the presenters. What a great line of speakers that they have. Enjoyed the presentations thus far and the words of wisdom, and look forward to what's to come. To start off with, this is a very interesting topic. As Rick called and asked me to present, and then gave me the title, Wildlife in the Context of a Cattle Operation. And I thought this was a really good angle or a good approach to start a conversation. So in this conversation for today, I'm the cattleman, and we'll be discussing what wildlife has, my experience and my opinions and my experience of what wildlife has brought to a cattle operation. So I really look forward to Marc and what he has to say, and his views and experiences, and know that we have a lot in common and a lot to discuss. So for the purpose of this presentation, I'm the cattle guy. So before we kind of get into the meats and potatoes of it, I feel like we probably ought to give you a little bit of an introduction or a little background of where I'm at and the operation that I'm on, and a little history. I did grow up around wildlife, even though I grew up on a cow-calf operation and on a ranch there on the Arizona and Utah border. Then my dad also had a guiding service, outfitting service. So we guided on the Paunsaugunt, which is on the Utah side. Most of you that have hunted trophy mule deer or hunted mule deer know of that. On the Arizona side, know of that area. On the Arizona side, you have the famous Arizona Strip and the Kaibab Plateau. So that was my backyard. So even though I'm the cattle guy, I've got a little history, paid for most of my college guiding hunts in that area. So, but for right now, I'm in Osage County, Oklahoma, which is kind of north central Oklahoma. We operate a little in the southern end of Kansas. We're basically kind of the south or southern end of the Flint Hills of Kansas. So it gives you a little picture of what part of the ranch is like. We're in the heart of the tall grass prairie. So when Rick asked me to discuss wildlife from a cattleman's perspective, from a cattle operation, then as I thought about it over over time, took a few notes, and really what does it mean? How do I view it? Then I'm fairly simple, and I came up with just a real couple, boiled it down into a couple categories. So really, what value, and I believe that wildlife brings a lot of value to a cattle operation. And so I really want to discuss what that value is. It's not necessarily monetary or financial. When I say value, I think there's a lot of intrinsic value that wildlife brings to a cattle operation. And then also the communication between the cattle and the wildlife, the communication between the enterprises. This communication is vital to success, and most of the problems that we have in life and in the world today are because of miscommunication or lack of communication. I believe that to be the case, and so those are really the categories that I lump this in, and what I would like to talk a little bit about. The value, the first thought of when I thought the value that wildlife brings to me as a ranch manager and to my cattle operation was this, and this is a financial component of it. It's what I've really kind of looked at as the market stability of wildlife. Wildlife versus cattle. If we go back and we look at the cattle market over the last 10 years, and this is a graph from the USDA that you can look at, and it has several different categories, cows, cold cows, calves. You look at, and really what I was wanting to look at is just the volatility of a market. And I should have broken this out in percent change, but we can walk through it. If you look at the cows, which is the bottom line, it bounces around over the last 10 years from 50 cents to $1.25. And you think about that on a 1,000-pound cow or a 1,200-pound cow, that's half the value. So from 50 cents to $1, you're looking at a 50% change. Even from 50 to 80, 30 cents on 50 cents, it's a large percent change if that's how we measure volatility. You can look at the calf prices over the last 10 years, and you can see that obviously we had the big spike in a big run in 14, 15, and 16. But even if you take that big run out, then you're still bouncing around $1.25 to $1.75. And so you're still bouncing around the 50 cents change on $1.25, and so on a percent change, that's a large number from year to year. On wildlife, without getting into the details, I looked at the last 10 years of the operation, and on a percent change, it was either neutral or positive 8 out of the 10 years. And the 2 years that it wasn't, the percent change was 1 to 2%. And so when I look at the two markets then, and if you want to look at the stability of the wildlife brings to a ranch, or the volatility of the cattle market, to me, this is one of the greatest complements that a wildlife program can bring to the ranch. It doesn't mean that it's bulletproof. There's obviously some volatility in all markets, and we probably saw some of that volatility back in 08, 07, 08, 09 when the housing bubble did what it did, lost a lot of recreational dollars and hobby dollars. And so it's not, and we've even seen that with the COVID, with the pandemic that's currently, the current environment we're in. Our wildlife and natural resource manager has held our operation together very well and has done a great job. So it's not bulletproof, but when you compare it to the cattle market, I would say the value of having a little bit of a stable, or the stability of that market is a great value to the ranch. So that's one of the points, and to me a big point of a wildlife enterprise to the ranch. The other part that I like about a wildlife is the diversity of income that's available, or I should say revenue that's available. When we're talking about wildlife, it's not just hunting. There's a lot of diversity, a lot of sources of revenue that surrounds the wildlife enterprise, and I'm sure there's people that are capturing these different revenues. It's not just deer. There's you've got your fowl, your birds, your fishing. There's the ecotourism, bird watching, photography. There's a lot of different types of activity that are surrounded the wildlife or the wildlife industry, and so to me that's another great value of a wildlife enterprise, and how much you want to pursue that, or how much a ranch wants put resources in that area, probably is dependent on a lot of different factors, but they are available, and it's a bonus, or could be a bonus to a lot of operations. The other part, and this is a big thing to me. To me, one of the KPIs or key performance indicators that we want to use on our ranches is margin per acre, and this really, to me, is well, it depends on your operation. If you're leasing a ranch, or there's probably some discussion on how this impacts, or how this influences your decisions. But for me, at Sooner, margin per acre is a big push. And one thing that I really like about when we're talking about net profit, and we break it down on a margin per acre, then this one goal can be used to unify the groups, can unify the employees. And so whether we're talking wildlife or whether we're talking cattle, then when we look at our margin per acre, then it helps us unite and focus on one goal. I think this is an addition that the wildlife enterprise brings, is that we can break it down on a per acre, and we know the revenue that comes on a per acre basis back to the ranch, and how it relates with our cattle, and that stability of the market. And so to me, it helps everybody buy in to what you're doing on both sides. It's a unifying goal for all of us. So that's one point that I thought I'd share with you, and some value that I found in how we're looking at these resources. The other thing that to me has been a kind of an eye-opening experience for me, coming from a real intensive, more cattle-focused operation and cattle passion, is I've found as we add wildlife to our management, as we add it to our management of the natural resources and our stewardship that we have over the natural resources, then it forces us to manage with a more balanced approach. And I think that's important. It's important in a lot of ways, and it's important, I think, for us that have stewardship over the natural resources to take that approach. And there's a lot of buzzwords or a lot of titles that probably explain what that management is. Holistic resource management, regenerative ag. There's a lot of titles out there that different people use that explain their style of management, but I think it really comes down to a balanced approach. I've looked at sustainability. It's a big buzzword, but I feel like it's something that we focused on as a ranch and as a company, and it's really kind of, I guess, broadened my views on really what we're trying to do and what is this balanced approach of management, and it's a way that we can break it down. And so what I'll do is I'll share with you a little bit about our approach to sustainability and the value that wildlife brings to me as a ranch manager, as a cattle operation, to this balanced approach of management of our natural resources. And how we look at it here at Sooner and in the company of the sustainability is it's really probably four different legs to a chair. You have an environmental aspect, animal health and welfare, a community or people, and then the economic. The economic side of this we've talked about with the market stability and margin per acre and those views. So what I'll do is I'll talk to you. I'll just share with you a little bit on how wildlife plays a big part in these other three categories of our sustainability approach of managing the natural resources. Starting off with environmental, and I've thought a lot about this, and I just want to share this with you. I think this is a great example of what a balanced approach, how it impacts management decisions. First of all, we all manage our resources with our own objectives and goals, and whatever those are to you, then that's fine. And so I just want to make sure that we all understand that we might have different objectives, we might have different goals, and I don't want to say one's right or one's wrong. I just want to share with you our approach or my approach. The picture here on this slide, that you can look at, then you can see this section with the dark section, I guess, on the left side of the slide or of the picture. That's 160 acres, and that's all cedar trees. And so we own the land around it. That 160 is owned by another individual. And this is a great example. That's their goal. The people that own that 160, their goal is to hunt. They want to hunt. That's all they want to do. That's all they plan on doing. And if this part of the area goes unmanaged, then the encroachment from cedar trees and hedge trees can explode over time. Historically, they've used a lot of fire or chemical to try to manage that encroachment. And so it's amazing to see the difference. And not that one's right or one's wrong, depending on what your objective is. But for us, we're a cattle operation. We also have a wildlife component of it, but the other part of this, in this area, is the greater prairie chicken. And so here we're trying to take a balanced approach, and I think this kind of outlines the difference of a balanced approach to managing natural resources versus focusing on solely one species, whether it's deer, whether it's cattle. It can be a very contrasting outcome of management. And so for me, the conservationist mindset of trying to stabilize the population of the prairie chickens, and which we've done on the ranch, and the wildlife biologist and his team has done an excellent job, a great job collecting the data and monitoring those populations, and we're very pleased with the outcome of what we've done and the approach to maintain that. But it also benefits the cattle. It also still creates some habitat for the white-tailed deer, the quail, and the turkey. And so I think this is, like I said, not the one's right or wrong. You can have the goals and the objectives that you want and manage accordingly, but our choices and our actions, there can be a lot of contrast, or the outcome can be very different on how we manage these resources. So just wanting to just share that concept. The other part is animal health and welfare. This, real briefly, I'll go through this a little, be real brief on this. So obviously animal health and welfare is a big part of what we do on the cattle side, but it's really been interesting to see how the wildlife enterprise has the same focus. We spend a lot of time trying to manage a healthy population of diversity of species. And it's a really interesting to see how the mindset is cohesive and works well together with the same mindset. It may be a different species or a different type of animal, but it's the same type of mindset. And it's been interesting to me to watch how that works together. The other part of sustainability is community or people. The wildlife enterprise has opened a lot of doors for the ranch to give back in many ways. It's been interesting to watch the wildlife dollar generate almost like a micro economy in these rural areas. Little hotels are changing their name to Hunter's Lodge, Deer Paradise, and those type of things because of the value that that wildlife dollar brings to these little communities. And then it also gives us a chance on some of as we're managing a healthy population, some of the animals that need to be harvested, it gives us a chance to give back to the community in certain areas and certain individuals that might need help. And so to me, that's an intrinsic value that the wildlife enterprise has brought to the ranch, is it has opened many doors for us to give back. On the communication, we talked about this at the start. To me, this is just the absolutely vital to success, and this is where the majority of the problems come from, is either the lack of communication or misunderstanding. And so this is, to me, this is vital, and I'm grateful for the company that I work with. This is a high priority, and I've learned a lot watching how this communication takes place, and I'll share some of that with you. But clear expectations, we absolutely have to have clear expectations. Our objectives have to be clear, our goals have to be clear on any aspect of the ranch. And there's a lot of ways we can do that, but I feel like a mission statement, strategic planning, breaking that down into specific initiatives or activities, that's something that we do as a company or as a ranch. And it's been neat to see that process take place and how much it helps with not just alignment, but also empowerment. To know why we're doing things, to understand the why is a big part of life, and that's what this open and clear communication gives us. And it's just vital that we do this to have success. The other part that's really stood out to me over the years is having scheduled meetings or planned communication is what I've titled this. And this is unusual for me because I didn't grow up in an environment where we had a lot of meetings, and I don't like meetings. I've had a lot of unproductive meetings that I've put on myself and been a part of them. And so our meetings have to be productive. But I've learned the value of these meetings, and I'll just share this example with you. It's common that we, in the cowboy world, it's common that I may do a training or share information with a unit manager that they need to share with their cowboys. They work with their cowboys every day. They're out riding across the pasture and doing their daily activities, and they may visit all day long, but they don't visit about strategy. They don't visit about financials or budgets or resource management plans. They visit about what they're trying to accomplish that day for the most part. And so I found that we have to plan time to talk about specific activities or goals or financials. And it does several things. One, if you talk about those things riding across the pasture, it comes across as a real casual conversation. And I'm not saying there's not any value in that, because there is. But when you plan a specific time to sit down and go over financials for your unit or financials for your ranch, and you have an agenda for that meeting, I found it comes across with a lot more of a lot heavier punch. Because what that's telling everybody is that this is important. It's important enough to stop what we're doing and discuss this topic. And like I say, we still have to make sure our meetings are productive and effective, but my experience, we have to have them. It's a very important part of communication. So we can talk about that, those meetings, whether it's between cattle and wildlife or whether it's between within the only operation, is it's important to schedule time to talk about these topics, whatever they may be. This is a great quote, and I can't even remember where I picked it up. I think it was in a meeting, but when I heard it, I've never forgotten it or read it. A decision is not a decision until everyone knows about it. I think as a manager, regardless of the size of our operation, we have to keep that in mind. We may make a decision in our mind, but until everybody knows about it, then it's not a decision. And so to me, this approach or this mentality really helps with the cattle and the wildlife enterprises working together, having the open communication, and knowing that if we make a decision, everybody needs to know about it. Otherwise, it's not a decision. So to wrap up, again, in my experience, being the cattle guy, wildlife programs do bring a lot of value to a cattle operation. The economic value, I think you can't measure the intrinsic value that adding wildlife brings to a stewardship or resource management approach, balanced approach to management. But the key is communication. We have to be clear with our communication. We have to use all available sources of communication and make sure those are open and open, honest discussions. So with that, I'll turn the time back to Rick again. I hope there's some value that you could pick up, or little tidbits of value you could pick up from the presentation. And again, really would like to thank Clay and Rick and their team for asking me to be a part of it. It's a great honor. I will leave you, however, with this last slide. I wanted to make sure, this is a picture off my back, off my front lawn actually. And I wanted to make sure I left a picture with a lot of cows in it, so that there wasn't, I've talked so highly of wildlife, I wanted to make sure that I didn't leave any doubt that my passion is still with cattle. So with that, once again, thank you very much, and we'll turn the time back over to you.
Well, thanks, Tyson. Certainly those of us that know you well have never, ever, ever doubted where your allegiance lies. So with that, we're going to change gears. We're going to hold questions until conclusion of the next presentation. So please enter your questions in the Q&A box. We've tasked Marc Bartoskewitz with the other half of this pair of boots. Marc is currently the general manager of ranch operations for the 84,000 acre Reese Jones properties here in Texas, which include the Cook Canyon Ranch in Eastland County and the Clear Fork Ranch, which is scattered across Shackelford, Haskell, and Throckmorton counties. Prior to his current position, Marc worked 11 years in several capacities for King Ranch, departing there as the area manager for natural resources. Marc currently serves on the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department's Whitetail Deer Advisory Board, and we've asked Marc to conclude this pair of presentations talking about cattle in the context of an extensive wildlife operation. So Marc, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Rick. I was able to get unmuted. There we go, maybe. I'm having a problem with my video.
Yeah, Mark, just take your mouse and click on the screen once and see if that doesn't give you control.
Yeah, I did. It's not giving me, I'm assuming y'all can hear me. Um,
Yes, we can hear you.
yeah, I just can't get
Hang
any,
with us just a second. We're working on that.
can't see my slides or anything.
There you go, Mark. You ought to be up and running now.
There we go. Now we're up and running. Okay. So they asked me to give the opposite perspective than what Tyson just did, which is cattle in the context of a wildlife-focused operation. First, let me say it's an honor to be a part of the King Ranch Institute Symposium. My ties with King Ranch, obviously, have been wonderful and were a huge experience for me and has gotten me where I am today. So with that, we'll get started here. Got a little bit of a delay, it looks like, going on, but we'll make things work here. Okay, so what I'd like to cover today first is what are the main challenges of managing cattle on a wildlife-focused operation? And let me reiterate, this is the approach I'm going to take is wildlife-focused operation. I'm a cattleman by heart, and as all these pictures you'll see in these slide backgrounds, they come from the ranches that I manage, all except for one. But we have cattle on the property, so please bear with me. Certainly don't want to hurt anybody's feelings on some of the things that I'm going to say here because it is geared towards wildlife-focused operations. Then I want to talk about real-world perspectives and views from wildlife and cattle managers. I actually got on the phone with several wildlife managers that manage some premier operations here in Texas and up in western states and up in the Northeast. And then as well as cattle managers, some that I would consider some of the best in the business, the younger generations up and coming. And I asked them questions on what their positive and negative viewpoints were of wildlife operations and cattle operations, and pretty interesting perspectives you'll hear. And then lastly, if we have time, I'll cover what I do here at Cook Canyon and Clear Fork ranches and how we manage our cattle on those two ranch operations. So 4 general areas I want to cover that I would consider challenges to you if you are going to have cattle on your wildlife-focused operation. The first is, of course, you might think I'm bailing out here, but it is. There's no one-size-fits-all scenario. It really depends on your goals and objectives for that specific property. And what do I mean by that? Well, so you may be 100% wildlife focused or 100% focused on deer management per se. For example, deer are very popular, so that's why I'm going to throw them in there. But so you might completely remove cattle off your operation. And there's ranches that are doing that right now and are very successful with that. Now, my opinion is you don't ever want to remove cattle from your, even if it's a wildlife focused operation. I think they add benefits and a tool. They're a huge tool and key to the success of your wildlife operations, whether you're 100% deer focused or 100% quail focused or non-game species, whatever it may be. But that is an option and a possibility, is to completely remove cattle from your operations. Are you profit motivated? I would gather that 99% of the folks that are on this call manage or own operations or deal with operations as a consultant that are profit motivated. But believe it or not, there's a small percentage out there that profit does not drive their operation. And that gives them some flexibility when it comes to wildlife management, because a lot of things and a lot of techniques that are used are very expensive. If you want to do some of the more involved techniques and really get down to maximizing your wildlife operations, sometimes having no profit motivation, motives is a good thing. And then lastly, optimization versus maximization. Dave Delaney hit on this at the beginning a little bit. If you're balancing your cattle and wildlife operations, even under wildlife focused operation, optimization is probably where you're headed. You may not be able to maximize wildlife if you're profit motivated on the cattle side. There's going to be some trade-offs there, but regardless, whatever your goals are, they're going to be unique to your property, the size, the habitat, the region that you're in. There's no one size fits all. Number two, and probably what I would consider the most important, other than item 4 I'll get to at the end of this, general challenge, is grazing management. And it's a big one. It's a big key to managing wildlife focused operations, how you manage the cattle herd when it's on your property. Stocking rates are so critical when managing for wildlife. They're always a moving target, whether it be seasons, rainfall, droughts, winters, harsh summers, wherever it is you may be. Stocking rates are the most important thing here when it comes to managing wildlife focused operations, and how you implement those stocking rates through grazing management plans and grazing management programs. The best managers, whether they're cattle managers, range managers, wildlife managers, whomever it is that's in charge of your grazing program, are always monitoring and always adapting to what Mother Nature, what the seasons, and what rainfall gives them on their properties. Surely they prescribe plans, but they're always adjusting those plans as they move forward, sometimes even seasonally, the ones that are really on top of it. So you must realize, in a wildlife focused operation, targeted specific grazing plans are paramount to creating the diversity and habitat needed for your objectives. Flexibility or lack thereof. Make sure that before you implement a cattle program to fit in your wildlife focused operation, that you make the right decisions on whether you're going to run cow-calf versus stocker, whether you're going to be a commercial producer or a seed stock producer. Which of these combinations are you going to use, and which is the best fit for your operation? Because a lot of times when you dive in, you've got a pretty good investment there on a cow-calf operation, or even a registered side, where you're going to pay a little bit more for some of those genetics. You're stuck there with that investment, and you may not give yourself the flexibility that you need to manage your wildlife operations. So be very, very careful when you make those decisions. Let's talk about some unintended consequences on the grazing management side. I would imagine a lot of you probably feed hay on your cattle operations. Well, most of the time, what I usually see thrown out is a coastal Bermuda bale of hay, like what you see in the background of this picture. This is one of our pastures. We actually hay for our cattle operations through the winter. You don't think in the back of your mind, everywhere you put that coastal bale of hay, that coastal Bermuda sprig that stays alive through the springtime next year is going to sprout, and next thing you know, you've got coastal Bermuda spreading. So one of the unintended consequences of cattle grazing programs is this introduction of some undesirable plants, species, whether they be invasive species or introduced grasses, that subconsciously you may not be paying attention to, but things may be happening with your grazing management program that are leading to some of these over a longer period of time. So you have to really pay attention to that. If you're profit driven and you need to keep your cow herd, from the investment standpoint, there's going to be a day when you're going to take more out of that pasture on the grazing side than what you really plan to. And you just got to plan for that. You got to have drought contingency plans. You got to understand that, you know what, we get into a drought, we can't reduce our cow herd because that's an investment that we have. We're going to have to realize that we're probably going to hit it a little bit harder than we would normally would. The beauty of wildlife focused operations is typically the majority of them are very conservatively stocked and run on a very conservative grazing program. So a lot of times you don't have to worry about that. But there will be a day that you will hit pastures harder than you want to for your wildlife focused operation. The third general run is infrastructure management. And Dave hit on this one again too. He basically laid out my presentation for me. So thanks, Dave, if you're listening. And on the infrastructure side, there's a couple of things I want to cover. First off is fencing. You know, we used to always joke when I was in accounting meetings that, and you'd start allocating expenses for fencing costs to the wildlife department and the cattle department. So wildlife guys would always argue, well, we don't need any fences, because wildlife don't need to be fenced out or fenced in. And so it was always a funny conversation in those meetings we'd had. But From a grazing management or cattle side of it, fences are necessary. Number one, to keep them in the pastures where you want to keep them so you can have good grazing management plans and manage the diversity in the habitat the way you want to for your wildlife operation. But at the same time, they have to have integrity. They can't be old dilapidated fences. They got to be able to hold cattle back or within a pasture, however you look at it. The style of fencing, you got to be real careful in a wildlife focused operation. If you put up net wire fencing and you live in West Texas or you live up in New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, where there's pronghorn populations, you are inhibiting the movement of your pronghorn populations if you don't create areas where they can move through. A net wire fence will hold them versus a barbed wire fence with maybe a slick wire strand on the bottom raised up a little. Like the example you see in the photo here in the background is one of our feed stations on our northern ranch. It's a protein feeder station. We can do that here in Texas and it's legal. And so we have a 5-strand barbed wire fence there. The bottom strand is slick wire and raised up about 18 inches to where those deer can easily, any wildlife can cross underneath and don't necessarily have to jump the fence and potentially get hung up. You can see in the little small picture there, you know, sometimes cattle panels don't work because you have cattle that like to bust through those. And so a lot of times you're forced to spend a little more money and put up those permanent fences around feeders. Food plots, if you don't want cattle decimating your winter wheat fields or alfalfa fields or anything, you're going to have to fence those off and keep your cattle out. Water systems. Now you might think, well, both cattle and wildlife need water, and they do, absolutely. In the majority of the time, they're very beneficial to both, but there are some caveats to this. If not managed properly, water systems can create issues. Too often, water troughs are not maintained at a safe level or have escape methods incorporated. Like in the right-hand side of your photo is a little rubber-tired water trough. It's obviously fairly empty here. So if something, a smaller wildlife animal or bird or something was landing in there, they could get out. But oftentimes I've come up to water troughs. They've been 4 or 5 inches low. They've been half full. Wildlife species in a drought and it's really hot, it's trying to get water, a bird falls in, can't get out because you don't have a log or you don't have any sort of metal apparatus to where they can climb up on, dry off and fly away. You see lots of dead mice, smaller mammals, so on and so forth. Some of you may think, well, you know, what's a bird or two? Well, in a wildlife focused operation standpoint, from a diversity standpoint, those are important things that we think of. On the opposite side, you see the river in the left photo there. We have 34 miles of the Clear Fork of the Brazos River that runs through our northern property, and it creates issues for us from a grazing management standpoint because it's hard to fence off that river. It floods, it washes out gaps. Sometimes with the rough country, we can't even run a fence down to the river. So cattle will learn areas to cross through and get on the other side of a pasture where you don't want them because you're trying to have a rotational grazing plan. Those are just some of the things infrastructure wise that you run into and how water systems can create issues for you. This one I kind of threw in spur of the moment on the infrastructure side, and that's housing. Keep in mind, most ranches and operations that have wildlife and cattle departments typically house their employees on the ranch. So if you're going to have cattle on your wildlife focused operation, you're obviously going to have provide more housing. Now it's up to you whether you want to have a mobile home, a real nice brick house like you see on the right, or something in between. But that investment is there, and you need to invest in those employees and those families. Along the lines of that is when you bring more employees on the ranch, your liability increases. Everybody thinks about that. Not only from just the standpoint of families living on the ranch and having, unintentional conflicts when you have a bunch of people that live on the property, but at the same time, when you have cattle folks, they have horses. They may want to bring private horses on the ranch. A lot of them are involved in FFA projects, or you can allow them to have those projects and steers and pigs and things on the ranch so their kids can show those. Most ranches do, don't get me wrong, they embrace that. But those are the type of things that you need to think of if you're just now getting into the wildlife focused operation, challenges moving forward if you're going to run a cattle operation. And then lastly, Tyson hit on this one, and I knew he would because it really is it's the big elephant in the room when it comes to either side is people management. And cattle and wildlife departments are like oil and water. They really are. I mean, I've not ever been in an operation, consulted for an operation, or been to a ranch and visited where if they have both, they haven't had some sort of issue, whether it's been communication wise or some sort of conflict. The reason being is that we're both passionate about two totally different things. And so when you have people that are passionate about two totally different things, typically you're going to have an oil and water concept there. But there's ways that you can manage that and hopefully get around it. And the first is clearly defined understanding of goals and objectives. Whether it's cattle departments, wildlife departments, land improvement departments, whatever departments that you have, those two need to have a clearly defined understanding of what the goals and objectives are of that property, in our case, wildlife focused operation. And they need to learn to embrace those. How do you do that? Well, I want to take a quote from the Texas Brigade's youth leadership camps that I used to be highly involved in, which are great youth leadership camps that were developed by Dale Rollins many, many years ago here in Texas. And they've just blossomed. There's 6, 8 different camps now, I believe. It's been a while since I've been involved, but they're incredible camps. There's even some that have stemmed off in Pennsylvania these days. And their motto is, tell me I forget, show me I remember, involve me I understand. And I think this goes great when it comes to us managers managing people in different departments. Sure, you can sit down with a meeting and have a good communication and tell people what it is that you want them to do as a general manager or as the head manager in charge. You can show them and they'll remember, but if you don't involve them, typically they don't understand and you're going to have conflicts. What do I mean by that? What I mean is get your different departments involved in working with each other. Have your wildlife department crews go out there and work cattle with your cattle operations and let them learn and see the challenges that they have. And vice versa, have your cattle department employees work with your wildlife department employees and to get an understanding of what's going on. Trust me, it may seem simple, but once they get involved and they really learn what's going on, hopefully they'll be, if you have a good team, they'll be sensitive and they'll make those changes and begin to work better together. Which leads me to the importance of teamwork, regardless of their passion. So this photograph here is a picture of some of our crew, our cattle department, some of our cattle department crew in their wildlife department, and some of our land improvement folks. And then I'm the guy in the yellow fire suit over there. We did a prescribed burn here on Cook Canyon Ranch. It was the first burn that had been conducted on the property. It's a very small burn, but the take home here is that we all work together as a team. Teamwork is involved. Obviously, the gentleman standing there in the cowboy hat is our cattle manager, Chris Hubbard, and then our wildlife manager is the guy over here that you'll see in the pink shirt there, and then a bunch of our wildlife crew and land improvement department crew. But these types of things that you get them involved in and they work together as a team builds teamwork, builds a team together, regardless of what their passion is, but it becomes a shared passion for all of them and they become closer together because they learn each other's how to deal with each other and how to work together with each other. And eventually that molds together, and at least that's your wish, is that it molds together moving forward for better operations. So let's move on to what they really think. Okay, so this is the interviews that I did with some of the wildlife and cattle managers, and I'm gonna start out with the wildlife side. These are positive benefits they pointed out, and I'm just going to read some of these. Proper stocking rates and grazing intensities can be used to manage grass loads, promote forbs, bare ground, and warm and cool season grass diversity. So it's using cattle as a tool to achieve those objectives. A risk management tool, manage fine fuel loads to mitigate larger uncontrolled wildfires, especially properties with lots of highway and county road frontage. Exactly, you can use, when you graze, you're obviously going to reduce that fine fuel load in that canopy cover, and which is going to mitigate some of your possible uncontrolled wildfires. Maybe you graze some areas along your highway frontage a little heavier for that reason. Focused grazing intensities and stocking rates can be used as a tool to help manage non-native and invasive grass species. Provides income to the overall operation. We've heard that from a lot of people, and certainly does. It's going to provide income to the operation. Provides a sense of legacy, heritage, and tradition to local communities where ranches are being purchased for more recreational use than livestock. This is a big one because it's so true. If you come in as a new landowner, and this generation, these new generations of landowners are doing this, they're purchasing property for recreational use. If they remove cattle, a lot of times the community doesn't like that because historically cattle operations for generations have been around on those ranches that are selling. So if you can keep that cattle on there as a tool and keep those cattle operations intact, a lot of times you're more accepted in the community around you because you continue to those traditions that were developed from the longtime landowners prior.
Hey, Marc, got about 5 minutes left.
Okay. Cattle provide a direct connection to the land for younger and succeeding generations of landowners. Help educate the youth about work ethic, horses, life cycles, record keeping, profits, being part of the team, and the food supply chain. Choose wisely between cow, calf, and stocker operations depending on how flexible you can be and where you're located. Negative impacts, much harder to plan and implement and be successful at range restoration projects, native grass, forward plantings, prescribed fire, riparian corridor management. Constantly in places where you don't want them to be, landscaping, feed pens, recreational areas, wrong pastures, that's the nature of cattle. Good fencing is expensive, so are cattle guards, but a lot of times it's much more enjoyable to drive across the ranch without having to get out and open a gate. Not always preventable, but a lot of times you can do that. Cattle are mischievous, knocking over trail cameras, rain gauges, bow blinds, fish feeders, ornamental information signs that you might have on the ranch. Typical complaints from lessees and hunters that grandstand around hunting locations. Wildlife bring economic value to the operation through hunting. This is cattle managers thinking about the positive benefits of wildlife. If you build a good relationship with your hunters, they can be beneficial to help you manage better. This works both ways. Opportunity to tell the story of ranching to the mostly urban groups that hunt and recreate on the ranch, introducing these lessees who come from urban areas to traditional cattle ranching environments. Build good relationships with state and federal agencies. This is especially important in the western states and up in the Northeast where there's a lot of publicly owned land. And then this is straight from a cattle manager, and I thought this was the most profound statement that I had heard. Everything we do for wildlife will benefit cattle too. And that's very, very right on. Negative benefits. These are pretty obvious. Leave gates, lessees leaving gates open, hunters leaving gates open, shoot their calves thinking they were pigs or another type of wildlife, destroy roads, cut fences, trespass on private property, start wildfires, get stuck, and want you to pull them out, usually at inconvenient times in the middle of the night, early in the mornings, interrupt roundups. So I just want to go with a little bit of time I have left through some of our operations, and I'll hit some of these briefly. We're privately owned and operated, 2 ranches, encompassing almost about 84,000 acres. We consider ourselves an ag-based operation, both wildlife and livestock. We have 42 full-time employees, 8 to 10 seasonal staff, and 8 different departments that we manage. Cook Canyon Ranch is 27,000 acres. It's predominantly recreational ranch for family and guests to enjoy. We use our livestock operations to help manage habitat for wildlife and provide income to offset those expenses. Clear Fork operations and the Rolling Plains habitat. We have 4 different, this is a little bit more business focused to some extent, 4 different lease groups that encompass 75% of the acreage. Approximately 20,000 acres is used for family recreation and commercial hunting. Cattle are owned by Cook Canyon Ranch and leased under a grazing lease on this ranch. And our goals and objectives are simple: extend excellence in natural resource management to promote land stewardship, science-based applied management practices, education, research, and outreach, and provide recreational opportunities for the family, friends to enjoy for future generations. We run a commercial cow herd, crossbred cows, about 1,000 animal units, spring and fall herds. We have one cattle manager, 2 full-time cowboys, one at each ranch, and multiple day workers. And then finally, we work together as a team, constant communication among wildlife, cattle, and habitat managers. And that's not always smooth and perfect, but we do the best we can. Conservative grazing approach, systems management, and applied science approaches. We're sensitive to each other's operations, and we try to have fun while we're doing it. With that, if I have any time, Rick, I'll take any questions. Thank you for your time. It's been an honor and a pleasure to be a part of this symposium.
Well, thanks, Marc. You did a really, really good job. Thanks to you and Tyson both. We've got one question in the Q&A, and I know Tyson's on. In the interest of time, Tyson, if you would just, if you don't mind, if you'd be so kind to jump on the Q&A and answer that question regarding the hunting enterprise at Sooner Cattle Company. I had a couple of 3 questions for Marc, but I think, again, in the interest of time, we'll move on with the last 2 presentations. So thanks again, Tyson and Marc, outstanding job. Did exactly what we had asked of you for this symposium.